Hello there, my name is Anish Gopala, and I'm happy to partner with Santa Clara County Library District to present to you the battles of Verdun and the Somme during the First World War, some of the bloodiest battles in human history. In order to understand these battles, we need to understand the context of the war that encompassed them. So, the main players in this war were the Russians, the British, the French, and the Italians fighting against the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, the Bulgarians, and the Ottoman Empire. So the German alliance was known as the Central Powers, and there are many names for the alliance that the British, the Russians, the French, and the Italians were in, but it is generally referred to as the Allied Powers. So there were the Central Powers and the Allied Powers, although there are other names to refer to these two alliances. So on February 21st, 1916, the Germans launched a devastating attack on the French fortress town of Verdun. It was also known as the Mille on the Meuse. And these horrifying atrocities were committed at the battle, including the death of almost 700,000 men total by the end of the battle. Additionally, the French aim here was to just hold the Germans off, right? So they were desperately defending it with horrendous amounts of deaths required to achieve that goal. But they were not really aiming to, take land at Verdun. They were just trying to hold their own there. And in the end, we'll see whether they did or not. The French government's motto to the people was "Ils ne passeront pas," they shall not pass. And in the end, we will see whether they achieved that goal or not. Additionally, it's important to note that this offensive onto Verdun was ordered by German General Erich von Falkenhayn. I'm not sure if I got that pronunciation correct. And he said that his intention was to bleed France white, or to force them to put so much manpower into the city that there's no way they could hold it forever. So, at seeing the horrible atrocities being committed at Verdun, the French sent out a plea for help to their British and Russian allies. And, well, let's just say they did not at all fail to answer. So the first to answer were the Russians, and they answered with the Brusilov Offensive. It was a widely successful offensive. So there were two main goals. One, to take land from the Austro-Hungarians, but two, to force the Germans to divert the soldiers away from Verdun and to shore up the line at the Austro-Hungarian positions. And it achieved both those goals through expert tactics, through stealthy movements, and a lot of planning. And in the end, they did not fail. The Russians did not fail. And it's especially important to consider that the war had been going terribly for the Russians. So now they were able to actually get it together and launch a successful offensive. And that was very good for Tsar Nicholas's PR. Tsar Nicholas II was the Tsar of the Russian Empire at the time. And after that, the British launched the Somme Offensive, also known as the Battle of the Somme. Actually, I should say widely known as the Battle of the Somme. Again, there were two main offensives here to gain ground in what was Belgium and is still Belgium. And also, they were trying to get the Germans to move troops away from Verdun and towards the Somme. And this was the first time that tanks were used in a battle. They were never used before. They were only prototypes. And at first, they were widely successful. They actually were able to, there's a certain fear factor in a giant, unstoppable metal box coming towards you and your platoon to ultimately crush you to your deaths, right? So at first, the German positions ran away. However, they realized, okay, we can stop this. And they just shot the tank and it stopped, because there were too many mechanical failures, and it was just not well maintained, and they were too few in number to actually make a difference in the battle. I think the British were expecting the Germans to run away under the sheer power of the tank. That's not at all what happened, sadly for the British. So there were three main offensives happening here. First, we have the Verdun Offensive, or the Battle of Verdun, which was ordered by Erich von Falkenhayn of the German military forces. and it ended up being a brutal slog for control over the fortress town, or the mill on the Meuse. And the French position, the French, what the French government said to the people was "Ils ne passeront pas," they shall not pass. And in the end, we see that the Germans did not pass, and they held up their promise, right? They said they will not pass, and they did not pass, right? And it's important to note that there was a soldier fighting at the Somme, known by J.R.R. Tolkien. You may or may not know him, right? He wrote Lord of the Rings. And that line, "You shall not pass," when Gandalf puts down his staff to stop the Balrog, he got that line from the French statement, "Ils ne passeront pas." Just a little interesting fact there. So they sent out a call for help at the Battle of Verdun, and then first the Russians answered at the Brusilov offensive pioneered by Alexei Brusilov, and it was widely successful for the Russians. And then Sir Douglas Haig of the British Expeditionary Forces launched the Somme offensive, or the Battle of the Somme, and it was the first time that tanks were used. And it did come out to be not as successful at all as the British would have thought, at least the tanks, I should say. So the Battle of Verdun, it was ordered by Erich von Falkenhayn. Again, I'm not sure if I'm getting that pronunciation correct. And the intention was to bleed France white, to force them to put so much manpower into the city that eventually they could not hold their own in the war. There were about 700,000 casualties total. Yes, these are huge numbers, right? So 337,000 German, over 40,000 more than that, the French suffered, and then about 57,000 British casualties. It is credited to be a French victory since they were able to hold off the Germans, that was their goal, but technically it can be thought of as a German victory since they suffered less casualties than the French. And it was, without a doubt, one of the bloodiest battles in human history, with horrifying atrocities committed in the trenches. And then we have the Battle of the Somme. So it was ordered by Sir Douglas Haig of the British Armed Forces, or the British Expeditionary Forces. It had two intentions: to relieve pressure on French forces at Verdun, and to retake territory that the Germans had taken from them. It was the first time tanks were ever used in the battle, although, as we know, those tanks were not widely successful. It did not really go to plan for the British. And there were about 1,265,000 casualties total. You can see it's more bloody than Verdun, these horrible casualties. There were 650,000 German casualties, 420,000 British casualties, and about 195,000 French casualties. So it was mainly a stalemate. So you see all of these casualties, 1.2 million casualties for a stalemate, right? But it can be considered a German victory, just because, first of all, the tanks did not work, and second of all, the Germans were able to hold their own, which was very important to them. That was their goal, and they were able to get it. And then the Brusilov offensive. It was ordered by Russian General Alexei Brusilov. The original intention was to force Germany to halt its attack on Verdun and transfer forces to the Eastern Front. And when Brusilov saw how effective his tactics were, he had the idea of, hey, maybe we can just carry this offensive to Vienna and essentially end the war, right? With Austro-Hungary out of the war, that will be the end of the war for the Central Powers, right? However, that did not happen due to some issues with planning on the Russian front. And it was, without a doubt, extremely good for the Russians. It's very hard to contest that. Even though they suffered horrible casualties, they got all their aims, and it was very good for the Russians. This is my bibliography. I got a lot of information from history.com, as you can see. Thank you for watching. I really hope you learned something new about World War I, specifically 1916, and the most bloody battles in history. And that is all. Thank you.